Good morning, RE.THINK Church. We are so glad to have you guys here this morning. A few announcements. For those of you who don't know, we do have a group that's coming in every Wednesday between 5 and 6 to lead a free workout class. I think it's called Revelation Wellness, and it's led by Leah Heiser and one of her friends. And so if you guys are interested in joining, you're welcome to come to the church between 5 and 6 on Wednesdays and be a part of that workout group. Second announcement is that if you or anyone you know is struggling maybe with your NIPSCO bill as things are getting colder out here, we do have some flyers in the back about a free weatherization program to kind of help prepare your home for winter and make it a little bit more cost effective. So if you're interested in learning more about that, we do have flyers on the little table by the back. So feel free to grab some after the service is over. If you are new or joining with us for the first time, we're really glad to have you guys here, and we want to give you guys a gift just for being here. So come find us at guest services after the service, and we'll give you a little gift. See if you have any questions, and we'd love to connect with you there. It is going to be located over by our One Cup Cafe in the lobby, so you can find us there after the service. And then lastly, I just want to thank you guys for coming and investing and giving to this church, the work that you're doing in Merrillville. We really believe that God is going to bring hope to the people of Merrillville through this church and through you guys, so thank you for your gifts. And if you would like to give to the vision and mission of RE.THINK Church, you can do so either online at rethinkchurch.cc, or we have a black box by the door. Thank you guys for joining us, and get ready as we continue to dive into Matthew.
Hope you guys had a good week. I hope everything was well for you. If you've been with us for a while, you know we've been in Matthew for like 2+ years now, right? And we're to the point now where like things are going to start picking up. Like there's a lot of big events, and so you're like, oh, we're going to cover a lot of chapters. We'll see how this goes, right? Like Heather was asking me, hey, when do you think we're going to be done with Matthew? And I was like, whenever we get there, right? So hopefully by 2022, put it that way. So, but as we're getting there, one of the reasons we really started working through Matthew is that we wanted to see what Jesus started, and we also wanted to see like how his early followers lived this out, and what does that look like. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 26. We're going to be under the heading where it says that he gets arrested, which I believe is verse 47. And so we're going to get into that. If you have your Bibles, you can turn there. If you turn them on, however you get there, and we'll be working through that. But I think what we're going to notice here today, my hope and my prayer this week has been that it doesn't just look like he got arrested, but it actually looks like, okay, what does Jesus do when things get a little tense? And so we're going to walk through that, through this path, this message. And because, once again, Jesus is our model. When things happen to us, how do we respond? And so we're going to see how Jesus responds in this setting. So part of what we want to get there and do that. So I'm going to read it really quickly, and then I'll set the stage to kind of bring us back into the context. So remember, this is a document that it's a letter basically that's written by one of Jesus' followers, but it's written in such a way. Imagine if we were to take our like daily life and say, let's say, pick an event, and we write it down, we just put it in a time capsule, and then in 1,000 years, people in Russia pick it up and read it. Are they going to understand all the details and the lingo and stuff like that? So there's some things we got to unpack. And so let's read it, and then we're going to go from into there. So verse 47 of Matthew chapter 26. While Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived. With him was a large crowd, armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal to them. The man I kiss, arrest him. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said to him, greetings, Rabbi, and then he kissed him. And then Jesus replied, friend, do what you came to do. Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for a sword, drew it out, struck one of the servants of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Put your sword away, Jesus said. For those who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think that I cannot call my Father, and he will not at once dispose of me, or to me, 12 legions of angels? But now, this will be the scriptures fulfilled that must say that happened in this way. And at that time, Jesus said to the crowd, am I leading a rebellion, that you've come to me with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me there. But all this had taken place so that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled. When the disciples after that, the disciples deserted and fled from him, I should say. So in this passage, this is going to be one of those passages that we're going to look through different passages throughout the scriptures, because it's one event that takes place, and all four gospel writers write this down. So it's kind of an important thing. So we're going to go from here. We're going to look in John chapter 18 as well. But it's one of those things that if we just read right over and we say, oh, yeah, Jesus gets arrested. And some of us, we grew up in a tradition where, like, the week leading up to Jesus' what we call Easter and all that, we read this, and it's so easy to get into those things. Sometimes we talk about this at the Sermon on the Mount, that we become so familiar with it that we actually become unfamiliar with it. It's the curse of knowledge. We just assume that we know what the next thing is. We assume we know everything about it. And so this is that we're just going to slowly go through this passage. This is why we've gone through Matthew at this pace, because we want to make sure we're not missing something that was crucial in that scenario, in this passage. And so remember, this is the week leading into Passover for the Jewish people. There's 150,000 extra people in Jerusalem, camping all throughout the hillsides, especially in the Kidron Valley and stuff like that. And as they're camping there, imagine, how many of you guys have been pre-COVID, let's put it that way, where you went to a fireworks show, maybe out in the field, and you're like, hey, this is where I left my blanket, and then as you leave, you get lost trying to get there, right? Where you try to go find your family, you're like, oh, this is kind of what's going on here. Jesus and his disciples have been camping out in this area, and Judas can't just describe to them where they need to go. He has to actually take them, because you can imagine all the ways to get around here, ways to get lost. There's grove clusters all throughout the Kidron Valley, just kind of scattered throughout here. And so Judas has to take these people there with him. John chapter 18 tells us this, that the Jewish court, the temple court and the Roman soldiers are working together. This is revolutionary. It'd be like two of the Democrats and the Republicans actually working together to get anything done. This is that kind of an idea. So here all of a sudden you have the Roman soldiers, and they're working with the temple guard at the request of the temple guard. I think the reason that the Roman soldiers are working with them is because the popularity of Jesus could have easily just sparked a rebellion. And the captain of the guard, the commander of the guard, is there with him. John tells us in John chapter 18, tells us that the Roman commander himself is there. That's a pretty big deal for John to mention this. So you have 150,000 extra people. You have all these people working together. And in this moment, it's easy to just kind of read right over. But Judas is the one escorting him here. And I think there's something about Judas actually betraying Jesus that we could just kind of easily ignore. But have you ever thought about why doesn't Judas just walk away from Jesus? Why doesn't he just say, forget this, he didn't fit my agenda, I'm just going to ignore him? Like the rich young ruler that we talked about earlier in Matthew. Or one of when Jesus has these harsh teachings. I think what Judas is actually doing here is he's trying to force Jesus to show, to fit into his agenda. He's trying to force Jesus into a position to fight. Judas has a preconceived idea of who Jesus should be. I think Jesus, imagine Judas being the eyewitness of all the miracles. And with Judas Iscariot. Iscariot is not his last name in the sense of what we have. Iscariot is a son of, and Cariot is this small little village 6 miles south of Jerusalem, which is a zealot headquarters, a guerrilla warfare type people. The people that they carry these curved daggers, and they would assassinate Romans and people who worked for Rome, let's say tax collectors. And what's Matthew? So Jesus collects them all and says, hey, let's follow me, right? And so you have this guy who has this military type mindset watching these miracles. And he's watching Jesus heal people just by saying things. And he doesn't even have to be in the presence. Imagine Judas's idea of man, if we have wounded soldiers in a war, he can just simply say something and all of a sudden these soldiers are healed. He can take the scraps of food and feed thousands of people. He can turn water into wine. He can probably make water out of nothing. And in a desert, ancient world, trying to find a water source was a crucial aspect of military warfare. More people died in the desert than in wars in the ancient world in this time frame. Imagine Judas watching all this saying, man, he just rose Lazarus from the dead 10 days ago. What else could he do for an army? But then Jesus says, I'm going to be crucified. Like the Last Supper, we just read through it like a couple weeks ago. He said that his body's going to be broken. He's going to allow the Romans to kill him for the ransom of many. And I think this is what Judas does. Judas has this preconceived idea of who Jesus should be, and Jesus has a completely different agenda. And Judas's disappointment leads to Judas's betrayal. I'm sure Judas is the only human who's ever had to deal with this, right? That this disappointment all of a sudden now could lead to something else. What Judas is trying to do here is trying to put Jesus into a position of, will you fight back? Will you actually start this revolution and kick Rome out? Will you overthrow the corrupt temple system? Will you do something other than just simply having nice words and healing people and loving people well? Can you do something else, right? And so Judas leads them here. And I think this is where the shame comes into. It's not like, oh my goodness, like, and this is why Judas ends up hanging himself later on. Because I think what he ended up doing was he had this preconceived idea, his disappointment now leads to betrayal. Judas had every opportunity just to walk away and just say, yeah, he didn't fit my agenda. But I think what he's trying to do here is trying to force the agenda. And Peter's no different, is he? We find out that Peter's the one in the other Gospels. Peter's the one who reaches in the sword and grabs it and cuts the ear off, right? And in that moment, Jesus, according to other Gospels, Luke tells us this, that he picks the ear up and he heals him and he restores that right there. And let me just point this out. Some of us, we've been hurt by some of Jesus' followers in the past, haven't we? We've been hurt by people who claim to be doing things in Jesus' name. I'm assuming that Peter has thought that Jesus would approve this action. Why else would Peter do it? Right? Like, there's passages time and time again about the zeal of the Lord and all this, and fight for me and all that, but, like, here's Peter just reaching out and reacting out of, like, impulse. And he does this. And if you've been hurt by the church, you've been hurt by people who claim to be followers of Jesus, I'm going to encourage you, just allow Jesus to himself to heal you. Go through the process of working through that, and allow Jesus to restore what has been broken in your life. I've had to go through that myself. As a pastor, I was just like, okay, God, like, people said they did this in your name. I'm just going to trust that you can heal me over time. And in these moments and walking with Jesus, it's been done. But it's one of those things that if you allow that bitterness to just kind of rest, it's going to grow to something that you've never even could imagine. But here comes Peter doing this as well. But I just want to, like, point out what I think Jesus is trying to, like, not just Jesus trying to get us to understand, but just try to see what's going on here. Because there's this, we're going to become Captain Obvious here in a second. And just bear with me, there's a point to it, okay? But here comes, Judas is leading this group of military-type people to the temple guard and the Roman soldiers. And what are the things that they carry with them? Clubs, swords, and according to what we're going to read here in a second, torches and lanterns. And that'll be an Captain Obvious moment as well. But here comes these temple guards. Now, the temple guard were militarily trained people who worked through, like, they would go throughout the Roman Empire collecting the temple tax from the synagogues from the Jewish people who lived in Rome or Ephesus or stuff like that. And so they would travel there, they would take the money, and then they would bring it back to the temple in Jerusalem. And the temple had this massive amount of money in there. And so you can imagine it become an easy target on the road, so the temple guard was there to do that. So when Peter tries to, like, attack the temple guard and the servants and stuff like that, think like a Boy Scout trying to fight a Navy SEAL. Right? Like, really, are you going to do anything? So, all that. So, here's this group of people. They have clubs and swords and all that because they're soldiers. Sometimes we read this and we're like, man, why do they have all this stuff? Well, because they're soldiers, right? According to John 18, they bring torches and lanterns. And I've always been amazed or kind of like odd, like struck it out, like, why do they have to like mention all these things? Can't they just save their soldiers bringing these things at night? But instead, they don't. Now, I don't like, we're supposed to have like the Northern Lights and stuff like that last night and tonight, but that's not happening right now because the cloud cover last night, right? So, but I have a friend who lived in Jerusalem for a year and a half, and I asked him, hey, do you have any pictures of a full moon in the desert? And so this picture right here is going to be a full moon in the desert. Imagine, like some of us, if you grew up in the country, you don't always have to have a flashlight and stuff like that, right? Like a full moon, you can see quite a bit. In a desert, you see almost everything. And I say this because our calendar is built on a solar, like on the sun's pattern. The Jewish calendar is built on the moon, on the lunar pattern. Every Passover is a full moon. So as the Passover was happening, as Israel was leaving Egypt, which is the celebration of that, it was a full moon as they were leaving. And so every year has been a full moon. When the Romans and the temple guard show up to find Jesus, it's not like they can't see him just in general. They were expecting to have to go into the caverns and the caves to search for Jesus. There's a massive tunnel system that Herod the Great built in this area to escape from Jerusalem out of there. Jesus knew about this, I'm sure. Like almost everybody knew about it. But you can see almost everything in this picture. Like you can just see it, right? They weren't expecting to have the conversation and this altercation just in the Kidron Valley. They were expecting to have to go into the caves to fight him out and to pull him out and stuff like that. And so as they're doing this, all of a sudden, now you can see this. Now, one of the ways that I try to get into this picture is imagining myself to be one of these soldiers or a character in a Bible story. If I'm trying to like, what's really going on here? And so just play this out with me for a little bit. Imagine soldier number one getting up in the middle of the night going, this is past midnight, probably 1, 2 a.m. in the morning. And they're waking them up. They're going to take a 10-minute walk from the Temple Mount down to the Kidron Valley to the Garden of Gethsemane. And so imagine a soldier one going, what in the world are we doing? Isn't this the guy that's been in the temple all week long? Why don't we just arrest him then? And this other guy going, yeah, I don't know, but this guy named Yeshua, he's like there, and people just say that he's a Messiah type thing. And he walked in earlier this week on a donkey, came in on a donkey. And if you remember in Jewish history, like about 1,000 years beforehand, this guy who built the original temple, Solomon, was inaugurated on a donkey. So him coming in on a donkey seems to be a pretty big deal. And like that huge crowd just came out and started cheering him on. You can imagine soldier one going, yeah, who cares? Like, it's just a guy who rode a donkey. Like, who cares about the prophecies? Who cares about all that? And then you have soldier number two going, yeah, but like all these miracles that he thinks that people said that he's done, like he's healed people, he's fed people, some people say he walked on water. And you can imagine soldier number one going, who the crap cares? Like, this sounds like fairy tales, right? Like, seriously. And soldier number two going, yeah, but there's a lot of witnesses. Like, people have seen like a lot of things about him. And he's done it in front of massive crowds. And then you have soldier number one going, yeah, but still. Like, do you believe like fairy tales? Do you believe made up stories? And then soldier number two going, yeah, but then he also has risen people from the dead. Like the last guy he did 10 days ago was like a mile away from here. And there's a lot of witnesses there too. And you can imagine this conversation going on. And as this happens, when I do it, I kind of envision myself going, okay, now we're in the scene. What else is next, right? And I want to take us to John chapter 18. John chapter 18 gives us a different vantage point. It's different details of the same event. And so here's John, and here's what he says. When Jesus had finished praying, this is going back into the Last Supper, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed into the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was an olive grove that his disciples went into. Now Judas, who betrayed Jesus, knew that place because Jesus had often taken his disciples there. So Judas came to the grove, guiding the department of soldiers and some officials and the chief priests and stuff like that. And they were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing what was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it that you want?" And they replied, "Jesus of Nazareth." And Jesus says, "I am he." And Judas the betrayer was standing there with him. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. And again he asked them, "Who is it that you want?" And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. And he says, I told you that I am he, Jesus answered. If you are looking for me, then let these men go. As it happened to these words spoken to be fulfilled, I have lost not one of those he's given me. And then Simon Peter drew the sword out, struck his ear of the high priest's servant, cutting off his ear. And Jesus commanded Peter, put your sword away. Now, here's this group of people expecting a fight, and then all of a sudden this Jesus guy stands forward and says, I'm he. And we read this going, okay, I am he, that's cool. But for them, they drew back and they fell down to the ground, right? The reason they fall down to the ground, there's a couple different scenarios, beliefs, or whatever you want to call it. One belief is that because they realize who Jesus is, that he is the Messiah. The other speculation is that Jesus would have said the name Yahweh. This goes back to Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3 is thousands of years before this event. This is the original, setting up the original Passover. This guy named Moses talks to a burning bush. Sounds like a great fairy tale, right? And out of this burning bush, a voice is speaking to him saying, hey Moses, you're going to go back to Egypt, and you're going to ask for my people to be let go by Pharaoh. And all that. And so Moses in this conversation was like, well, who do you say, like, what's your name? Right? Like, that would be a nice thing to have settled, right? Like, so-and-so sent me. Burning bush doesn't really go with, a good thing. And so the voice from the burning bush says this, I am. And that's his name. Solves a whole lot of issues, right? Like, awesome. Way to clarify things here, burning bush. So here's Jesus, and he's quoting this, right? He's saying, I am. And all of a sudden, if he said the word Yahweh, the Jewish tradition would be that he would fall down to the ground at the saying of his name. And so you have this aspect going on here. And I think what we have to understand is that he is Jesus, right? But at the same time, people are just, like, he was a normal, everyday person. And we don't really know why they fell down to the ground, but they fell down to the ground for some reason. But I just want to point out, like, what does Jesus actually do in this moment? Here comes a group of people looking to arrest him. And he doesn't hide. He steps into the tension. Right? I don't know about you, but there's times where it feels like things are just simply stressed over, like it could be overwhelming. Life in general can be, right? And there's times where it feels like people are hunting you down, in a sense. Maybe some of us have bill collectors hunting us down. Maybe some of us have whatever hunting us down and feeling like the enemy just wants to overwhelm us. And here's what I want to point out. Jesus doesn't hide from these scenarios. He steps into the tension. And he steps right in there. And what he's described himself in John as a good shepherd. He steps into between the attacker and the sheep. And he steps in there and he says, let these guys go. I'll be the good shepherd. You just came to arrest me. And I don't know about you, but sometimes it feels like some of our past comes after us. Sometimes it feels like we have enemies that are coming after us. We have people, we have scenarios, we have rumors. And it's tempting just to hide back into the shadows, isn't it? What we see Jesus doing is he steps right into the tension here, and he says, I am. And this sets a scenario for followers of Jesus to constantly just step into the tension moment. Does that mean we have all the solutions and all the answers? Not really. But instead of hiding back into the shadows, hoping that somebody else steps up, followers of Jesus for thousands of years just stepped into this. For example, there's a guy named John Wesley in England in the 1700s. He's a pastor in the Anglican Church, and he noticed that people stopped coming to his church service. So he would get up at 4 a.m., get ready. He would go to the intersection where people were going to work every single day. At 5 a.m., he would be preaching at a street corner. And so as coal miners and candlestick makers and all these other people were going to work, he's preaching. And he was noticed that when he was in Ireland one time, he was under a tree, and he was there for 5 days preaching. And these guys kept climbing the tree, and he was thinking, oh, because I'm short, he was about 5 foot tall, because I'm short, they want to get a better view of me, until he started getting urinated on. They were climbing the tree to urinate on him every morning. And he just kept showing up there, because he knew that they needed Jesus. And he was willing to endure all of that. At one point, there's this massive mob, because as he was teaching people about Jesus and saying, hey, you should stop getting drunk, and you should start using your money wisely to advance the kingdom instead of gambling it away over and over again. Followers of, like, as the Methodist movement started moving and stuff like that, all of a sudden people stopped drinking to the point of getting drunk in bars. They started gambling, and it started really interrupting the economic system of certain towns. So this massive mob came rushing after John Wesley. Like I said, he's about 5 feet tall, and he stepped right into the front of the mob and shook the guy's hand who wanted to, like, literally kill him. And so as he did this, all of a sudden the mob turned into his protectors. And they're like, oh, okay, we can do this. See, sometimes when you step into the mob and you personalize the mob, you put a name to the face and all that, they don't want to just overwhelm you. There are times over and over again where we see this, and it's just one of those things that I just want to point out, like, we talked about this before, that Matthew and John are constantly bringing up this idea that Jesus is in a garden in this passage, which brings us back to the original garden, right? And if you notice the pattern here, that when in Genesis chapter 3, the garden is there as well, and God comes looking for the people who've sinned during the day. In John chapter 18 and Matthew 26, it's during the night that the fallen, the sinners have come out looking for God. They don't know that Jesus is God yet, but he's there, right? And then the first human brings sin into the world, but the best human is going to remove the sin of this world. And during this moment, we see that Adam recedes into the shadows, and Jesus steps right into the light during this moment. And there are times over and over and over again that we could easily find ourselves receding into the shadows of our own life, right? But I think Jesus wants us to step into the light and to bring whatever the issue is with us as well. 1989, and June 5th of 1989, I was a little kid, less than 10 years old, and I remember seeing this picture on the TV, and some of you probably saw this as well, with this one man in a line of tanks in Tiananmen Square, right? And if you remember, this revolution was going on, the resistance, the protesters of college-age students were going on. 300,000 soldiers had been deployed into this area from the Chinese government to kind of squash this rebellion and these protests. Martial law had been instituted, and then all of a sudden they started sending the tank after tank after tank until the tank man showed up. We don't know his name. I don't know if he's a follower of Jesus, but this is a good example of, like, hey, here's some tension going on. Here's this force coming after me, but I'm not going to allow them just to overrun me. I'm going to step right into this tension moment and do this, right? We see this in our own country in the 1960s with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. saying, I'm not going to just settle for whatever this status quo is in this moment, right? And he steps right into the tension as he marched in cities after cities and spoke at churches and events after event, right? What's he doing? He's bringing to light some of the issues that people just settle for the status quo. And then we have these other ones. You have Rosa Parks, for example, doing the same thing, right? In our own current reality right now, we have people like Destiny Rescue who are noticing people are being exploited around the country, around the world, in the sex industries, and they're saying, no, we're going to step right into this. We're going to rescue and we're going to restore and redeem the victims of sex trafficking in places like and they step right into these moments and do this. And for some of us, it's easy just kind of like glaze right over and be like, oh, that's cool. But for some of us, we have our own baggage, don't we? And we have our own issues that we need to bring into the light as well. And we constantly are like Adam and we recede into the shadows. Or like what today is. Today, this is Reformation Day. I don't know if you knew this or not, but there's a good professor in Wittenberg, Germany, who stepped right into the light saying, hey, let's just bring some questions with us. And he posted 95 theses onto a door in Wittenberg, Germany, just saying, hey, let's have a conversation. That's all he wanted to have. And instead, he accidentally started a Reformation. But all of a sudden, he brings up 95 ideas of theses, saying, hey, what about this in your church doctrine? What about this? And stuff like that. I don't know about you, but for us, it's easy for me to look at something like this and saying, yeah, but what does that help with me? Right? Maybe you're sitting here and you have a straining or struggling marriage. Maybe you're feeling unsettled in your marriage, in your relationship. Maybe look what that looks like is you bring that up to the other person and say, hey, something doesn't feel right here. What's next? When you say this, when you treat me like this, it makes me feel like fill in the blank. Maybe it means instead of like just constantly distracting and numbing ourselves, we just simply sit down and we just process through the pain and the anguish that we have and the disappointments that we have. Maybe it's time to actually voice the disappointments in Jesus because he doesn't fit our agenda, isn't fulfilled all of my dreams that you had and stuff like that. Maybe it's time for just to be honest with Jesus and say, Jesus, here's everything I got. I don't want to hide in the shadows anymore. Right? And for us, for me especially, going through that process and just saying, Jesus, like, I went into ministry and thought my life was going to be easy. I don't know what I was thinking in that moment when I said, yeah, I'm going to be a pastor. It should be easy, right? But all of a sudden, like, I just had to voice all of those frustrations and disappointments and just kind of let the pain, just get the pain out and just talk with him about it. That was part of that process. Maybe we have addictions that we're just hiding in the shadows. We're unwilling to bring him into the light. And because of that, we have things that just constantly come after us and say, hey, it's time for us to go through this. So I'm going to put up 3 questions for you. I would encourage you, find 1 or 2 of them that you can just simply process through. When you sat down today, there should have been some note cards on your seats. We'll put a timer up, and I just want you to process through 1 or all of these questions, and we'll go from there. The first question is this. What does it look like for you to join Jesus on his way to the cross and to step into the tension this year? The second question is, what addictions need to be brought into the light? And where have you receded into the shadows like Adam? I know for some of us, we look at this and like, man, Jesus, he gets betrayed. But I want us to notice this. Jesus refuses to be treated like a victim. Jesus steps into the tension, he steps into the light, and he owns the situation. What we read in John chapter 18 is he sees this mob coming, and he's the one who steps forward into this tension, and he refuses to be treated like a victim. Most of us would see betrayal as an avenue of becoming treated like a victim. Like I was betrayed, I got my back, like backstabbed. We have all these kind of phrases for this. But notice what Jesus does and he steps right into it. We talked about this last week, that he settles this idea that, is he happy about this whole scenario, by the way? No. Not at all. He just settled it. Last week he says he's praying, he's in anguish, he has all this pain, he's like literally sweating blood because of the anguish he's in. But if you notice his pattern, what we see Jesus doing is he's having this time with his Heavenly Father, and he's settling that agenda there. He says, I don't want my will, I want your will, God. And after he settles this, that's when he steps into this tension. And I think the pattern is crucial. Some of us, we wonder why we can't have like life of victory, life of freedom, but we're not willing to follow or model our life after Jesus and the pattern that we see in that. We see Jesus time and time again praying and having these what we call spiritual disciplines where he connects with the Father. And it's through these spiritual disciplines that he can serve the world around him in ways that like we can't even fathom at times. But here we are, we have to settle this down. We have to follow the pattern. Connect with the Father and step into the tension. And some of us, we have things that we're trying to hide, we're trying to like just cover up. And I want to encourage you time and time again, connect to the Father and step into the tension. Now, is everything resolved in this passage? Nope. Once again, it's not one of those nice little, we wrap a little bow on this message, but I want to encourage you, connect to the Father, step into the tension of your own life. And don't give up because you didn't have it settled in one scenario. It may just take some time. It may just take a rinse and repeat. We don't need to make it all too complicated, right? But connect to the Father, step into the tension. Let's pray. Jesus, thanks for this day. Thanks for who you are. And Jesus, thanks that all of these examples we talked about, whether it was Tank Man or Martin Luther King Jr. or Rosa Parks, it was all examples reflecting your ultimate sacrifice, where you, at the pain of anguish, you settled that you were going to follow your Heavenly Father's agenda. And you were going to step into the tension. Not for your own benefit, but for the benefit of humanity. And some of us have things that are just constantly coming after us. Maybe it's your past, maybe it's other things. Maybe it's your addictions that we have. But Jesus, I pray that you would allow us to connect to you and then step into the tension of our own life. And some of us, God, we know exactly what that is. So God, I pray you would just give us courage to connect there. We love you, Jesus. Junior, we pray this. Amen. Well, church, if you need any prayer for prayer requests or anything, I'd love to meet with you back at the green wall back there. So I don't want you to feel like you need to go go through whatever you're going through alone, and that you can connect with the Holy Spirit as well. Church, I want you to know this to be true, that God loves you and that I love you. And as we follow him, we'll count on the best he has to offer for us. So let's go and be the church. Have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday.